That is the tree, a deodar tree that was planted on one of Baba's birthdays, and it's a very slow grower. And it's a slow grower like them, says Tim. It's very small when Baba saw it. I can't remember how old it really is, and you can't tell by the height because the deer nipped it when it was about 5 feet high, so that it now I really don't know how high it really should be. Those are, of course, they live thousands of years. And I told Bob that I had planted a sequoia tree, and that I would have a rendezvous with him in 700 years when he came back, and he just sort of grinned and waved his finger. But it's that one is free to grow. Well, kids, as the saying goes, when every weed you pull is one samskara that you pop up. Doesn't that feel good?
Who first told you that?
Don't you get a thrill? Ah, God. No, but that's an old saying. And Baba commented on, every tree, every blade of grass, practically. What is this? What's that? And his usual manner of terrific interest in even the smallest thing. When I drove Bob up from Los Angeles in that rather now battered station wagon, I opened the door. Baba was still seated there. I opened the door from my side, and a little collie came bouncing up. And she was a beautiful half collie and shepherd. I opened the door and I said, "Baba, meet the spirit of Mayermont, collie." And so Baba reached across the seat, and she came into the car and lifted her head up to him, with her laughing sort of face. And he put his hand on her head very gently, very sweetly, and just, looked at her for the longest time, and then finally said that now that she had been touched by the avatar, she would be a human being in the next life. And the dog looked as if she really understood it. She was so sweet. And she just sat there with her mouth open, just gazing right at him. It was very sweet. Well, all right. So Bob and I arrived here. He was still hanging onto my arm. And I said, "It's your tree, Baba. I've let the limbs come down so that it would enclose it. And I think it's a very lovely little temple, isn't it?" So, and so I came in with him, and he walked over, and I stayed about halfway through, and he walked over right to this spot, and there he sat down, and he squatted here like this, and just then the others came panting up to the doorway, and they were rushing forward. He went very severely, "No, no," and pushed them back. I mean, with his hand, waved them back, and they stood there in a circle. And he sat here very, very silently, very solemnly, and you just felt worlds moving. But really, very seriously for about 5 minutes before he got up, and then rejoined them. And I don't think anyone else came in. I don't know why, but he made a big issue of no one following him in, and just looked around. And you could tell by his expression that he loved it. And I think he did make that typical gesture, the beauty of it. And he did not climb the tree, as someone last week announced that they had heard that he'd climbed this tree. He certainly did not. Children do; they love it. I think he commented about the cables that came, and I explained that evidently the farmer who was here was planned to hold up limbs, and I was very concerned because the weight was so heavy that I decided to let the limbs come down to the ground and rest, which they have. And over the years, you see, it makes a complete little enclosure, perfect little temple. And Baba showed this extraordinary interest in, he always did, and whatever was in his presence and at that moment was terribly important. Microcosm, macrocosm, didn't make any difference to him. And he was leaning out of the window and pointing to this and pointing to that, and very animated. You turn around, talk to the mandali, and they were gesturing and talking and buzzing as if they were, big land dealers planning to, to subdivide or do things. I mean, that was the excitement and interest that he always showed. And then making comments and comparisons between India and this looks like so-and-so. So it was really fantastic. The whole trip in, everything that we came to, he had to have a description of. He had to know what it was. I got to the point where I was even telling him the geographical layers and all about the formations of mountains. And nothing missed his interest at all. And then the Manli would say something, I would say something with big excitement. This is perfect, prima sort of thing. The entire trip in, he didn't just sit sullenly like most people do. They drive, feel to lovely scenery. Baba was always 100% with you, no matter what the situation, the most mundane. But the whole way, you see that valley, you can see the valley that we drove through coming from Los Angeles. And it is, it's rural, and they have the famous citrus, the limonera of California, the largest citrus forest really probably in the world. And so we drove through these, just, orchard after orchard, and it's beautiful, it really is. Well, what you always have to remember that, your words come back to haunt you. And my first letter to Baba, before I met him, there were a lot of really graspy people trying to get a hold of Marymount. Very ruthless. And I became very indignant and very protective, so I thought I'd have to help Baba. And so I said, Baba, I'll hang on to Marymount for you for hellfire and damnation. That's exactly what he's doing. So you have to be very careful what you say to him. Always. Because there's no escaping afterwards. That's the only explanation I have for all the ups and downs and So on one of the occasions when Baba called me over, he was looking very solemn and very as impressive as only Baba can look. And he stood probably diametrically in the middle. And one of the Mandali was here. I can't remember whether it was Eric or Adi. And Baba said, I want Agni to know that I love Marymount very, very much. And then, of course, that typical gesture of very, very much. And I am very happy. And he literally beamed. I mean, he just glows. He had been very tired with the trip from Myrtle Beach to Washington to L.A. And he just stood here and he was very, very happy. And he looked at it. And then he said, and I want her to know that Marymount has a very spiritual atmosphere. Because I made my usual wisecrack, I don't know what it was, and stared at me and repeated it. It has a very spiritual atmosphere. Then I think I went out. And then this was repeated throughout the day. I was always yanked back in again for some other event. And on another occasion, he was in here alone, sitting in that chair, which is in that same position. And he called Charmian. She was already here. And I said, you have a camera? And she said, yes. So he said, I want Agnes to have a special memento of this day. And he said, we'll take a picture. So he was sitting there, and I came in and sort of knelt down by the side. And she took two good colored pictures, which I cherish very much even now. But he was throughout the day he was doing these fantastic, these really wonderful, these personal little gestures that he always does to make one person particularly happy. This is Baba's room. We called it that from the very beginning. And it had been set aside in the early days as a meditation center. Not too many people were interested in meditation. They said Baba isn't interested in it. So it finally became just a general room where people met. And but on Baba's visit, we brought him here, and this is where he was with the Mandali when he wanted to. Well, he didn't particularly want to be alone, but this is where he stayed most of the day. And he had told me, he told one of the Mandali to announce that I was to be, this was my day, and I was to be with him every minute of the time. But as things worked out, I had to be over at the main house as much as here. So periodically, one of the Mandali would dash up and say, hurry up, Bob wants to see you, Bob wants to see you. So I'd come back, and there was always some big event in the afternoon. He and Adi and I and one of the Mandali were here alone. And I thought this was the time to break the news to him that I was not going to San Francisco in the airplane, that I thought it would be much more feasible to drive up in my station wagon. And he really exploded at that. He went through all this, indignation and what? You're not going to come with us? I said, oh yes, and Baba and Adi's coming with me. That Baba really hit the ceiling. What? Adi, my Mandali, deserting me? And Adi just, he faded out. He just hid behind Baba. And I said, well, Baba, what's wrong? What's wrong? And so then Baba was very annoyed, very indignant with me. And why I kept persevering, I don't know. But I said, well, I have to, Baba, because I have some books to take up for Ivy, and I have to have transportation to come back. I was making all these big arguments. And so he said, well, you can't go alone. You can't go alone. I said, well, no, that's why I wanted Adi. He said, out of the question. So, with gestures. So then he, with whom are you going? So this went right down the line. And I had Lud Dimful first, and then he called him in. And he said, no, you have things to do. Then he called, then I got B Dimful. He said, you don't feel well, do you? Your eyes aren't very good. You can't drive, can you? And so he frustrated every attempt I made. And I became more and more stubborn. I was determined I was going to drive up. And Baba kept saying, but you can't go alone. You can't go alone. And I said, well, yeah, but I'll find someone. So this went on. And he finally brought Dana in. And I said, Dana's never driven up there before. I said, impossible. He'll lose the way. Finally, we left it that way until we got to Los Angeles. And then a very interesting thing happened. Mike, I can't recall his last name, was a young boy who had been engaged to a young girl on the trip. And Baba broke the engagement in this room. And he said, no, she is not for you. She is marrying, and I think it was a friend of Mike's. And of course, Mike was brokenhearted. None of us knew about it. But when I got to Los Angeles that afternoon, the Mandali called me and said, Baba wants Mike to drive up with you to San Francisco. But the interesting thing was that all the way in, when I drove Baba back in the station wagon, he made Adi get out of the front seat. And he implied that he wanted to be there in the front seat alone with me. And so Adi sat in the back, but leaned over and did the interpreting. And Baba put his hand on my head and very seriously said, drive very carefully, very, very carefully. I said, well, Baba, I'm going only 45. I'm crawling already. What do you mean drive carefully? And so he frowned, impatiently, pretended to be impatient with me. And then Adi said, no, Agnes, he means, when you go to San Francisco. I said, oh, that. Well, there had been no arrangements made, and I was rather puzzled. And 3 times he repeated that, all the way into L.A. He'd put his hand out and repeat. I just said that, what does Baba say? I mean, he doesn't say yes, he doesn't say no. He just, he just beams and smiles, and that's all there is to it. I mean, he plays our little games with us.